For the last 50 or so years, the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch has used basically the same movement. First the caliber 861 and then the caliber 1861, which is essentially a rhodium-plated version of the 861. Last year, Omega introduced, or I should say reintroduced, the caliber 321, which was the very first movement ever used in the Speedmaster, and which is the movement that went to the moon during the Apollo program. But after 50 or so years, it seemed pretty clear that the caliber 1861 was due for an upgrade, and this year, Omega introduced a new version of the Moonwatch, the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch Master Chronometer with full METAS certification and a coaxial movement, highly anti-magnetic, the caliber 3861. It's the latest Speedmaster, sure, but is it the greatest? We thought we'd find out during a week on the wrist. Now, one of the most interesting things about the movements used in the Moonwatch is that they really are in a sort of continuous lineage going all the way back to the 1940s. The very first movement used in the Speedmaster was an absolutely classic mid-century chronograph movement, the caliber 321. This is a lateral clutch, column wheel chronograph with a Breguet overcoil balance spring running at 18,000 vibrations per hour. And it was eventually replaced in 1968 and 1969 with a new version of essentially the same movement, but with some major changes. Caliber 861 did away with the expensive to manufacture and somewhat more delicate column wheel mechanism, and instead substituted a more robust, easier to manufacture, and easier to set up lever and cam system. In the 1990s, the caliber 861 was updated to the caliber 1861. Gone was the beautiful copper plating characteristic of the 861, and it was replaced by a very, very modern looking rhodium-plated finish with an additional jewel count, so one extra jewel added. That movement still goes all the way back to the 1940s, but at the same time seemed important to Omega to continue to produce a Moonwatch that had more modern technology in it and that represented state-of-the-art manufacturing. For that reason, Omega chose to switch out the 1861 this year for the caliber 3861. The first places that Omega used it were 3 limited editions, 2 Apollo 11 limited editions, and a Silver Snoopy 50th Anniversary limited edition, which was extremely popular and almost immediately became extremely difficult to get. Now, as I've said, the 3861 is a technically extremely advanced movement. It's one of the very rare hand-wound coaxial calibers. Most of the other coaxial calibers used in Speedmasters by Omega are actually automatic movements. In terms of movement architecture, you look at it and you could easily mistake it for a caliber 1861 at first glance. It has the same basic movement architecture as the 1861 and the 861. However, it has a coaxial escapement, a silicon balance spring. It's highly anti-magnetic, up to at least 15,000 Gauss. So it's essentially immune to magnetic fields. It's also more accurate, with a daily rate variation of 0 to +5 seconds per day. And it should offer a longer service interval as well. Now, one very interesting fact about the new Moonwatch and about the 3861 is that in addition to the METAS tests, in addition to the chronometric tests, and in addition to all of the tests that a master chronometer rated watch has to undergo in order to get a master chronometer rating, the new Moonwatch was also subjected, under observation by METAS, to the same battery of tests that were originally applied to the Speedmaster Moonwatch back in the 1960s when it was qualified for manned spaceflight by NASA. These include vibration tests, exposure to extreme hot and cold, exposure to a hard vacuum. In other words, today you've got a Moonwatch that actually has a movement more suitable for manned spaceflight and better suited for all-around rough usage than any movement that's ever existed in a Speedmaster before. Now, if you take a look at the outgoing caliber 1861 Speedmaster and you compare it to the new caliber 3861 equipped Speedmaster, it's very difficult to tell the two apart. One of the most interesting things about the new Moonwatch is the new bracelet. The new bracelet is thinner, much more flexible. It's 5 links across. In the Hezolite model, the intermediate links are brushed, but in the Sapphire Sandwich model, which is the model that we got in for a week on the wrist, you see polished interlinks. The effect's really, really subtle, though. It's not garish at all, and it's something that you almost have to look twice to notice. Overall, the entire bracelet feels much lighter than the stock bracelet on the outgoing 1861. It feels like a better fit to the watch. It feels like something you could wear every day right off the bat. There are other vintage-style design elements as well, including the dot over 90. And we have a beautiful step dial, which gives a little bit more depth to the new 3861 than the outgoing 1861. One interesting thing is that the pusher feels quite a bit smoother on the new model, and I think the slightly higher price probably also reflects a bit more time taken in the general adjustment of the watch. You almost feel as if you're operating a good quality column wheel chronograph rather than a lever and cam mechanism chronograph. The new 3861 actually doesn't feel disconnected in any way from the history of the Moonwatch. It feels like an evolution, not a revolution, and it feels extraordinarily respectful to the history of the Moonwatch and to its history of use in manned spaceflight. You know, ultimately, when you take this thing, put it on, wind it up, you don't feel like you're looking at a new Speedmaster. You feel like you're looking at a Moonwatch.